Alright, hey guys, and welcome back to another video. Before we get started showing you guys some PS2 recommendations here, I just really quickly wanted to thank all of you for the overwhelming amount of support and love in the comments section in my PS1 Hidden Gems video. It really meant a lot to me, and it makes me really excited to share tons and tons of PlayStation recommendations with you guys. I'm going to be doing PS1, PS2, Japanese imports, more US games, even PAL exclusives. But I figured before we jump into the imports, what do you say we do some US PlayStation 2 games? So I picked out a nice little stack here of some games that I really hope you guys have never even heard of before. So what do you say we jump in? We're doing this one old school style as well. So first up is probably one of my absolute highest recommendations in the PlayStation 2 library if you are a fan of arcade racing games, and that is the King of Route 66. You guys, this game is so under the radar. I almost never heard anybody talking about this game, at least prior to me finding it myself. Now, this is a game from Sega. It is extremely arcadey. It essentially feels like a game that should have been on, say, the Dreamcast, but is on the PlayStation 2, and there are a lot of games like this out there on other consoles where it's the concept is sort of like this really over-the-top truck racing one-on-one style racing game, but this game really sends it over the top. It's got that really boisterous, like rambunctious kind of like announcer voice that kind of narrates the play-by-plays of everything that you're doing in the game. There's a lot of mini games. You know, you're talking about giant trucks that are jumping over cliffs and everything and racing, and you know, you got the beautiful girls, of course, in there, which is a big theme of this game. It's super cheesy, super over the top, and if you're a fan of arcade racers and you have not played the King of Route 66, this is honestly essential in my opinion. Next one's for all you platformer fans out there. Hopefully this is one that you've never heard of before. It's, once again, you know, since this is a hidden gem sort of like obscure games video, it's not what you're typically going to hear most people recommend, and that is a game called Ruff Trigger. And what is the subtitle in this? The Vanocore Conspiracy. Vanocore Conspiracy. I played this one a few years ago, and I got to admit, it's nothing crazy, it's nothing special. It's definitely like below the greats out there, the Jak and Daxters, the Ratchet and Clanks, the Klonoas. You know, it's definitely in the middle to like lower end of the spectrum for 3D platformers, but it is a 3D platformer that is exclusive to PlayStation 2. It's put up by Natsume. I honestly trust anything that they put out, publish, develop, whatever. And yeah, I always buy anything with their name on it. It's just one of those companies that I trust. Like I used to trust companies like Squaresoft. I'd buy everything they put out. Things are a little bit different these days. So this one, it is kind of like a cross between Ratchet and Clank and Jak and Daxter. Don't get too excited though. It leans a bit more towards Ratchet and Clank because it does have gunplay. The gimmick in this is that this guy on the cover here, Ruff Trigger, he actually transforms into a werewolf, and it turns the game sort of like into a beat 'em up during those segments. It's very straightforward. It's no frills. It's nothing crazy, but if you're a 3D platformer fan, you should still check this one out. It's worth playing. I beat it in one sitting. Okay, this one here I feel is really, really obscure. When I streamed this game on my Twitch channel, almost nobody had heard of or played this game, so I figured let's feature it here because it wasn't that bad. And that is a game called IGPX Immortal Grand Prix. Now this is apparently based on some anime that I've never heard of, never watched, but what makes this game kind of stand out and unique is that it is a racing game, but it's also a fighting game at the same time in a weird way, where it's this tournament style, bracket style, like your robot mech team versus the enemy AI mech team, but while you are racing, you're also fighting and duking it out. So there's like these one-on-one fighting sequences as you're racing between your team and the enemy team, and there's stats, and you level up the stats, you improve your robots. And I know this is making this game sound insanely good, but trust me, it's not that good. It's okay. It's just that there might be some fans out there that didn't know that this game even exists, especially if you've watched the show before. Just temper your expectations. I know my description of this makes it sound incredible. It's okay. Check it out. It might be up your alley. Now this one here, however, I highly recommend this one. And, you know, some of you might like click off the video at this point because you're like, oh, you know, I have no interest in the games this guy is recommending. But if you're a Sonic fan, you're going to want to pay attention to this one. And that is Astro Boy. Now, the important thing is here, we're talking about Astro Boy from Sega, okay? And this ain't just any Sega-developed game. This game is developed by Sonic Team. Yes, you know, Sonic Adventure, those guys that made the Sonic Adventure games, Sonic Team worked on this game. Now, there are two Astro Boy games. There's one based on the movie, and then this one is just, you know, based on Astro Boy. Now, I don't know much about Astro Boy, I'm going to admit. I went into this game expecting to really probably not like it because I don't really follow the source material so closely. But I was actually kind of blown away by just how good this little concise 3D action. It's got some platforming in it. The platforming is not that great, but mostly you're flying around. But what I love about this game is it's very cinematic. It's got a lot of cutscenes. It's got that Sonic style. You can tell that this was developed by Sonic Team. It's got a lot of that sense of like cinematic cameras, a lot of cutscenes, a lot of cheesy cutscenes. The pacing of the game is very fast-paced. You never really stay in one area for too long before you move on to the next. And the length is quite nice. You can definitely beat this game in a day or two or a weekend. Very nice, short, concise game. And the battles themselves, it's got some nice blend of beat-em-up elements and shoot-em-up elements with shooting your bullets and your lasers and flying around. One of the more fun things to do in this game is fly around, and I feel the way that they actually handle the camera. I know that sounds crazy that Sonic Team can actually make a game with a pretty good camera to handle the action. But yeah, I feel like this is a very solid, like 7 out of 10-ish kind of game. Maybe even more points if you're familiar with Astro Boy. This one here is for music rhythm fans, and this may be a music rhythm game that you're just straight up not familiar with, and that is a game called Technic Beats. Now, this game here is a bit different than most music rhythm games in that it's not like notes coming down on the screen like Guitar Hero and you're trying to match and hit the notes. Instead, you're actually moving a character around on the screen, and notes will sort of emanate, like almost like, you know, when a raindrop hits, say, a puddle, and the raindrop sort of like ripples outward. Think of that as the music notes in this game that are kind of like sprinkled around the game board, and you're moving a character around to the beat of the music to those notes, which are to the beat of the music, and then pressing buttons in correspondence and tapping in the rhythm of those sort of like beats that are radiating on the floor. This is the best way I can describe this game. Now, it does feature a lot of cool remixed music from Namco games. On the back of the box here, they say it's got Pac-Mania, Dig Dug, Galaxian 3, and more. I streamed this game quite a while ago, so I don't remember the full music repertoire that is in this game, but I do remember it being pretty decent. And for those of you that really enjoy or already like this game, there's actually a sequel that only came out in Japan, or I can't remember if this was actually the sequel to the Japanese version, but anyway, I believe that game was called Technetics or something. Anyway, Google it. Google Technic Beat PlayStation 2 Japan. I'm sure you'll find the Japanese version if you really get into this. All right, here's another arcadey game that I don't know. I just randomly decided to play one day and had a blast with it. Now, the funny thing about this one is, and if you're hunting for this game in the wild, the spine of this game is actually completely blank. It's just a black spine, similar to Astral on the Sega Saturn, and that game is Crisis City. Now, this is a pretty inconspicuous little helicopter rescue game that, once again, feels like, you know, in the same sense of King of Route 66, it feels like a Dreamcast game on the PlayStation 2. So if you're a really big Dreamcast fan and you're a fan of those sort of over-the-top, really short mission-based arcade-style games, you want to check out City Crisis. It's been a while since I played this one, but I do remember having fun. You know, you're chasing down bad guys that are trying to escape. You're also rescuing people from burning buildings. It's got short timers and, you know, some kind of like arcadey music. And yeah, it's just a fun little game. Should be really easy to find. Should be nice and cheap. Nothing crazy. Not going to break the bank. Now this one here, I feel like a lot of you may be familiar with this one, but for those of you that aren't familiar with it, this one always kind of blows people's minds, because when they find out what this game actually is and who made it, they're always like, wait, what? So I'm sure you're all familiar with From Software at this point, the Demon Souls, the Dark Souls games, Elden Ring, but if you want to get a sense for where their earlier beginnings were, there's actually a game on the PlayStation 2 that they developed called The Adventures of Cookie and Cream. Now this is, and I, you know, just to show you that I'm not lying to you here, if I can find it, oh, it's going to be too hard for you to see. You'll just have to take my word for it. This is developed by From Software. Yes, the guys behind the Souls games. And this is a very cutesy puzzle, I guess you can call it puzzle, auto-scroller platformer, but it's meant to be played co-op. And the really unique thing about this, you play as these two cute little rabbits. But what this game was kind of billed as was, if you wanted to play this game co-op, they encourage you to use one controller with two people. So if you're on a nice like little date, or just playing with a friend, or you got a bunch of friends over, you are meant to just have one controller and each person controls one rabbit with each joystick. It's really wacky. It's actually quite difficult to play this game by yourself. You can do it, but controlling both rabbits, it's like using two different sides of your brain at the same time. You know, what do they say? Pat your head and like, I don't know, you know what I'm talking about. It's one of those kind of games, so it's quite challenging, very cutesy, and also just a super fascinating look at some of From Software's earliest works. Okay, now this is another one where people might be like, oh, this guy's crazy now. Why is he recommending this game? But guys, I'm telling you, you have to take my word on this. This game has been slammed and made fun of so much ever since it came out, but I do feel like the generation that grew up watching this movie is starting to not only appreciate the movie more, but everything surrounding the prequel universe having to do with Star Wars. And that game is Star Wars Super Bombad Racing. Now, I know before you start crying out in the comments that this game is completely terrible and I don't know what I'm talking about, take my word for it. If you rented this game back in the day, yeah, it was a little hard to stomach. With Jar Jar and the big heads, it looked ridiculous, but man, let me tell you, when I revisited this game a few years ago, I had an absolute blast with it. First of all, the music in here that they made exclusively for this game is sort of like a Cantina-style remix soundtrack of a bunch of famous Star Wars songs within Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. The music is absolutely phenomenal. I encourage you to play this game just for that if you're a Star Wars fan. But this has also grown to be one of my favorite kart racers over the years, and that's mainly because this game features a jump mechanic, and if you want to have a lot of fun with this game, you need to trust me on this one. One of the buttons, I believe it's one of the shoulder buttons, actually lets you jump, but this is no like pitiful jump. You can jump pretty high, but when you start to combo the jump with the boost, you suddenly turn this game into like a platformer kart racer where you're just jumping and jetting and flying around and taking shortcuts that maybe the game did or did not mean for you to take, and it's just a ton of fun. The courses are all really unique, especially with the music. Unfortunately, Jar Jar is honestly one of the best characters. When it comes to the speedrun, he's actually considered one of the best. You don't have to use Jar Jar though. But man, if you're a kart racing fan, and you know how it is for kart racing fans these days, it's a little hard for us to find games that we really enjoy that kind of harken back to the original N64, PlayStation 1 days of, you know, our Mario Karts and our Crash Team Racings. And while I'm not saying that this game can stand up to the best of the best, I'm just saying that it can compete on a lower level for being an actually really good kart racer. It's nice and cheap, it's easy to find. Give this game some extra points if you're a big Star Wars fan, and some extra big points if you are a Phantom Menace fan as well. Okay, now this one here is one of the, I think it's the only license, well, take that back, Star Wars is licensed, but this is a licensed game that might kind of surprise you, and I was surprised as well, because this is the kind of game you'd see in bargain bins and lots on eBay, and just kind of pass it by because you're like, it's just another licensed game. But there was a time where somebody, and you know, forgive me, I do forget the name of the person, but thank you to the person that recommended this to me at Portland Retro Gaming Expo several years back. They recommended it so hard they just straight up bought it for me and gave it to me when they saw that I was hesitating, and that is Walle on the PlayStation 2 specifically. Now, I'm not an expert on all the Walle games, but from what I understand, the PlayStation 2 version of this is its own unique version. The other versions aren't exactly the same as this, but 3D platformer fans, take my word on this. This is a fantastic 3D platformer with some light puzzle elements, but what really makes this stand out is the fact that a lot of the platforming feels physics-based. So it really feels like when you are jumping and rolling around as Walle, he can kind of like tilt and tumble, and kind of like, it feels like you are controlling Walle, which is a little unstable robot, as you're jumping and, you know, sort of hovering and gliding and jumping around. The first level in this game is in a construction yard, if I remember right, and it's such a great example of what makes this game so much fun, because it's like a toy box and a sandbox where you're just trying to figure out how to get Walle to navigate this sort of like rickety construction yard with his really fun, non-conventional physics for a 3D platformer at the time. So yeah, if you're a fan of Walle, you'll love this game, and if you're a fan of 3D platformers, I think it's worth checking out. Alright, and the last game that I'm going to talk about and recommend to you guys here, I feel like a lot of you probably know about this, but maybe you haven't had a chance to play it yet, and the game is getting a little harder to find and a bit more expensive, and especially with a new one in the series coming out soon, I really feel like if you're going to grab it, the time might want to be soon. And I actually exposed myself to Gungrave for the first time a couple years ago. I still have not played Overdose, but I did play the original, and I was absolutely blown away. Originally, I was doing some price predictions for PlayStation 2 games, and I had to revise the price that I thought this game might be one day after I'd played it, because it was just so good, because this is going to become a cult classic, which it already is, but trust me, Gungrave, if you are a fan of the days of old of PlayStation 2 era, Xbox era, GameCube era, heck, even PlayStation 1 era action shooting games. If you miss that style of simplistic point A to point B, like you start a level, you just zip down that level shooting and killing everything, explosions everywhere, no crazy gimmicks. It's just like you got a button to shoot, you got a button to dodge, you got a button to jump, you got a button to run, and you just cause some crazy havoc. And then you can beat the game in one sitting. Just have an absolute blast with it. Doesn't overstay its welcome. It's got some really crazy, weird cutscenes in between, but you don't. It's not like the story is overbearing. That style of game, that is exactly what Gungrave is. Now, I had no familiarity with the universe of Gungrave. I know that there's other content out there outside of games, but let me tell you, you don't need to know any of that stuff. This game pushes the limits, I feel, as well, of the PlayStation 2 visually when it comes to like the amount of explosions going on the screen. And if I do remember right, there are, there's some instances of slowdown because it does kind of get pushed to the limits, but it kind of feels like a Bayonetta style game. And there is another game in the future that I will be recommending that feels a bit like Bayonetta. We'll get to that another time for another PS2 Hidden Gems video. But this is one of the closer things to like a Bayonetta style game on the PlayStation 2. And it gets my absolute highest recommendation if you're looking for something new to play for your PlayStation 2. So there you go, guys. We had a nice little stack of PlayStation 2 recommendations for you. I've got plenty more PlayStation 2 recommendations that I can do for you guys in the future, so be sure, if you enjoyed this video, if you made it to the end, be sure to leave a like and a comment. It lets me know that you guys want to keep seeing more of these kind of videos. I'll have import, Japanese, PAL, and more US PlayStation videos coming in the future to recommend you guys some games that you've maybe never heard of. So, and if you haven't watched yet, be sure to check out my PlayStation 1 video, which is probably going to be recommended somewhere over here. And yeah, thank you for watching. See you in the next video.